So Ken, we just got finished with one of the best interviews we've ever done. And the story behind this episode goes back about a year when I read Profit First for E-commerce Sellers. I remember I read it. I called you. I was like, dude, you got to read this book. This is going to solve all of our cash flow problems. And so we read this book, and when we started this podcast and we're coming up with dream guests, Cyndi Thomason was one of our dream guests. And today we recorded an awesome interview with her. What did you think?
Yeah, no, it was fantastic. And I remember when you reached out and said, hey, Ken, you got to check out this book. I read it, got everything set up, and then nothing. And it's like one of the ways to fix cash flow, but it was the hardest thing to get going. And one of the things Cyndi covered in the show was the number one reason people do not implement Profit First and how to fix that. So the show was amazing. She covered a lot of great stuff. And I think you've mentioned it a couple of times, being an accountant, cash flow is one of the number one issues for e-commerce businesses. And if you can get Profit First set up and running, you're off to the races.
Cash is king, baby. This is an episode you're not going to want to miss. Welcome, everyone, to the Firing the Man podcast. On today's show, we have the pleasure of interviewing Cyndi Thomason, the author of the best-selling book, Profit First for E-commerce Sellers. Ken and I read this book last year and have been implementing the strategies discussed by Cyndi in our own businesses. Welcome to the show, Cyndi.
Thanks, David. Hi, Ken. It's great to be with you guys.
All right. Well, first question, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I have an accounting business called Bookskeep that I founded about 6 years ago. Was looking for a lifestyle business, somewhat like a lot of Amazon sellers. I had a daughter at home that I was needing to homeschool because she had dyslexia, and had accounting training and worked in corporate world, and cloud accounting was coming along about that time. And I realized that I could create this remote business. Started out because a friend asked me for help, but I saw that there was an opportunity to build this business to help e-commerce folks kind of live the same kind of life I was looking for, having the opportunity to work, but be flexible in my schedule and that kind of thing. So me in the business, we live in north central Arkansas and have animals, and I guess our favorite thing is just being outside and enjoying the Ozark Mountains.
Very nice. Very nice. Now, as I mentioned in the introduction, you have authored a book titled Profit First for E-commerce Sellers. What led you to writing that book?
Well, when I started this business, cloud accounting was just getting going, and I had the opportunity to go to San Jose to the first QuickBooks conference. And I was in one of the sessions, and it was after lunch, and it was really hard to stay awake. But over in the room next door, people were laughing, and you just hear this whole uproar of laughing. And so after about 20 minutes, I'm sitting there and I'm nodding off, and I think, I should go over there. So I got up and I went to the other room. Mike Michalowicz was giving his very first talk on Profit First. And I heard the end of it. Didn't quite understand everything because I didn't get the context, but he gave us the book, and I read the book on the plane ride home. And I realized that all of my clients, for me to keep them as clients, they needed to do something like this, because if they didn't, I saw that cash flow issues they were having, and I was just concerned that, as a longevity concern for my business, they needed to be healthy. So I called Mike and Ron that runs the Profit First Professionals, and I joined. And in that whole relationship, Mike became my business coach. Mike Michalowicz became my business coach. And he was very adamant about, you need to create a niche specialization, because you can't be all things to everyone. So in that coaching with Mike, he said, okay, so what niche would you pick? And at that point, I had a handful of e-commerce clients that had come to me word of mouth. And I decided that, they were after a lot of the same things I was, the flexibility in their lifestyle. They were comfortable with technology, and, we work remotely. So I need people that are going to be okay with helping me log into, their Amazon account and that kind of thing. So there was just a lot of similarity in the way we like to work. So I started working and focusing on e-commerce clients. And then Mike's book, Profit First, got picked up by Penguin House. He had self-published the first edition. So he was sending out emails saying, okay, you've been implementing Profit First for a while. What should I add in the revised edition? And I kept saying, well, my clients need inventory, and my clients, need information about, all these different things that I have in my book. And he never picked up on it. And he'd send out another call and I'd send the information. And finally he said, okay, I hear you. Why don't you write your own book? Because that's too specific for what I have to publish for a mass market. And I said, okay, I will. Do I have permission? And so, of course, there was a negotiation around the permissions part of it and the license, but that's what led to it, because I could just see there were pieces of how the original Profit First worked that I had trouble implementing with my clients. And so I had workarounds for them. And that's why I wanted to get that information out to help people see that it does work for e-commerce, because I had several clients come to me and say, yeah, I read the book, but it doesn't work for e-commerce. I'm like, oh yeah, it does. And so that's how it came about.
Now, Cyndi, can you explain what is Profit First and how can you implement that into an existing e-commerce business?
Sure. Well, Profit First is like the envelope system that you maybe remember that your grandmother had. You remember a lot of our grandparents would have envelopes for things like they'd put money in for rent, or maybe they had an envelope for their groceries or for Christmas presents. Money had a purpose. So when that money came in, it went into an envelope for that specific purpose. So Profit First is a strategy for taking the money that you bring into your business and giving it a purpose. So for e-commerce sellers, one of the big things that we have to keep in mind is we want to keep the inventory flowing. So we would have an envelope for inventory. We would have an envelope for profit, because we are taking the risk as a business owner. We need to be sure that we are also getting the reward for the effort that we put in as owners of our business. They're buckets for taxes, because the government's going to be sure and get a portion of it. So having those tax dollars set aside is another bucket where we know that based on the income that we get in, we have to put money in these buckets. Well, what that does is it makes things a little shorter in the operating expense bucket. And by doing that, it really creates the efficiency and the innovation and just the frugality that you need to have to put the right pressure on your operating expenses in your business. So Profit First just really allows us the way to give our money purpose and to ensure that we take care of the important things in our business and stay lean on the things that can get bloated over time. So when you're an existing e-commerce seller and you've got this business going on already, and you're probably getting your money in and putting it in a operating checking account, what we do is we work with our clients to create a few accounts just to start. And we start moving that money off into additional accounts. So, for example, I like to think about it as a beach entry and not a cliff dive, because what you're wanting to do is you don't want to put shock waves into your cash system, because if you do things too quickly and too fast, what happens is you're just moving money around and you think over a few weeks or a few months, I'm just moving money around. This is never going to work. If you do it slowly and with the proper steps, you can move money in a way that you get yourself positioned to be able to handle those expenses like inventory separately from your operating expenses. You position yourself to handle and build up that tax account and your profit account as you're cutting back on your expenses. So what we do with most of our clients, they're already existing businesses, and we just design that beach entry so that we're taking some baby steps towards making this happen as we're getting expenses under control. And we're looking to play out a strategy that's going to take sometimes 18 months before it's actually working exactly like we want. But absolutely, it can be done for businesses that are up and running.
Sounds good. Now, one thing that really stood out to me when I was reading this book was Parkinson's Law. And just to give you a little bit of background here, I've been in business for a little over 4 years, and I would say my biggest struggle has been cash flow. And as a CPA, that has been incredibly humbling. And when I read about Parkinson's Law, it just seemed to explain all the issues that I have been having. And so can you explain that for our audience and how it may apply to some of the businesses that you have in your practice?
I sure can. I love Parkinson's Law. Parkinson's Law was created by Cyril Northcote Parkinson. He was a British naval historian and an economist. And what he did was study bureaucracies, specifically the British Navy itself. And what was interesting to him was, people would be busy and they would bring in new resources to help, alleviate the busyness in the office. And those people would just immediately be busy. And the Parkinson's Law, what he learned from studying this is that we use what we got. I mean, that's the shorthand of it. So if there's a lot of something, you use more of it. If there's less of something, then you tend to conserve. The example I like to use when I speak is a tube of toothpaste. When I'm out traveling, I take this little tube of toothpaste with me, and I try to make that toothpaste last as long as I'm going to be on the road. And so many times it's just a little dot of toothpaste on my toothbrush. But when I'm at home and I've got this big tube of toothpaste, I'm very liberal with it, and I fill up my toothbrush. And if I'm at home and my toothpaste is going to run out and I'm not going to get to the store for a few days, I go back to conserving because I only have a little bit of it. So when you think about Parkinson's Law and apply it to money, you can see that if you're looking at that bank account and that money is just all mixed up there with, maybe some of it's going to have to pay for your inventory, maybe some of it's going to pay for your payroll or for your warehouse rent. When you think about all of those things all jumbled up into one account, you don't really go through the mental math to figure that out. You just look at it and you say, there's a lot of money in here. And then you start acting like, how am I going to use this money? And the way Parkinson's Law pays out, just because of human behavior, is we start figuring out ways to use that money. So if we separate it into the bank accounts, like I described earlier, then you're giving that money a purpose. And that you can look at your inventory account and go, okay, I've built up this much money. When am I going to have to order again? Am I going to have enough? Am I setting enough money aside for making my next purchase? You can look at your operating expense account and say, okay, this is how much I have to cover every month. Am I going to have enough in here? And just by having separate accounts with a purpose, you start to short circuit that Parkinson's Law a little bit, because you're able to realize that that money has a purpose and that it can't just be used because there's a whole lot of it there.
Yeah, excellent description. And I think Parkinson's Law for me also, it chews up the money, but also the time as well, if I don't allocate it properly.
Exactly. I think it should be taught in school, because how many of us had term papers that were due, the last 2 weeks of school or something, and we started on them week 3 before the end of school. We had all semester to work on them, but we waited because we had a whole abundance of time. So I think it does. It applies to any resource that you have.
Yeah, that's funny. So a common strategy in e-commerce is to grow and build your business by reinvesting all of your profits back into the business, via inventory, adding new products, product launches. What is your opinion of this strategy?
I think it's done oftentimes with the goal of growing the top line. And I think that's dangerous. And what I see played out over and over again is I've even heard people say, my mastermind is working on growing at a certain level, and we all have to grow our top line by a certain level by the end of the year for us to meet our goals. And I'm like, oh my goodness, a whole bunch of people with different businesses, all working towards a common goal of growing top line revenue. And that may just not be the right strategy. It is only a good strategy if you have got your business dialed in and you understand your profit margins, and you've from a gross margin level first. Are you making money in the business model that you have? If you scale a business that's not making money, you're just going to grow that faster, and you're just going to get to a deeper level of debt and a worse cash situation using that model. Sales is not the answer to every problem. And I prefer that when we work with our clients, what we want to do is be sure that we've got the business model dialed in, that business is going to be generating gross margin enough to support a reasonable operating expense to leave you with some net profit. Just making sure the business is sound before you pour the gas on it, because whatever you've got, when you start pouring gas on it, either you're going to burn out of control or you can go far. But you've got to have things dialed in. And I think people skip the getting things dialed in part.
So just to expand on that question, the title of this podcast is Firing the Man. And that often means people that want to quit their full-time job and run an e-commerce business. And say somebody wants to quit their job in 1 year and they want to pay themselves $50,000 a year. But at this point in time, they cannot take $50,000 out of the business or else it would crumble. What would be your recommendation to that person to inch forward towards that goal?
Well, that's the recommendation. You inch forward. And we've worked with many clients to get in the position to go full time into their business and leave their day job or whatever their employment is. And Profit First, because Mike in his book, he did the research to understand what the benchmarks are of a healthy business. We know, depending on the size of a business, we know what percentage should be taken out of that business to pay for the owner's involvement in the business. So when we know that, we can kind of reverse engineer and get back to, all right, how much do I have to sell at what profit margin, gross profit margin, to get me to the point of making this kind of money? And what we do with clients is if they've got an existing business already, we look at how that business is performing and how much we can actually carve off into an owner pay bucket. And then we start to build on that, and we look for ways. Can we increase price? Can we reduce the cost of the product? Can we reduce operating costs? All the levers, we try to figure out what can we do to pull those levers so that we can move the business in the direction of being able to support the owner that's wanting to go full time. And we don't just do it as an experiment. We do it in a way that we start putting that cash aside in a bank account so that as we're inching forward, there's a bank balance building up. So when we finally say, all right, today's the day, you can turn in your notice, we've got some cash already set aside so that if there's a problem in the first few months, you've got your salary sitting aside that can cover you while things recover. And so it's not just an exercise of building a model. We're actually building some cash at the same time to be able to have a little bit more comfort in making that transition.
Okay. Now, I have heard you mention gross profit margin quite a few times. And can you explain to our listeners what that is and how that differs from net profit margin, and why you place such an emphasis on that gross profit margin?
Sure. The gross profit margin is you take your revenue and then you take your direct cost out for producing that product. So it may be what you pay for the manufacturer to develop the product. It may be some prep center work to get it packaged up and labeled, or in the way that you want to present it. There's probably some shipping that you incur. Those things that the expenses that you have in getting your product ready to go to Amazon. Amazon fees are also put in the direct cost bucket. So you take your revenue, you subtract out those direct costs of getting your product to your customer, and that gives you your gross profit. And if you take that gross profit and divide it by your revenue, multiply it by 100, that's your formula for gross profit margin. And you want that to be 30% or above, because if you don't achieve at least that level, you're not going to have enough money to throw into the operating expenses to run the organization. So that's gross profit margin. The net profit margin is when you take the calculations that I mentioned before, revenue minus your cost of goods sold type expenses, the direct product cost, then you subtract out your cost for advertising, your cost for your salary for you and your team. You may have subscriptions. All of those expenses, insurance, all of those expenses will come out as operating expenses. And what's left after that is your net profit. And that net profit, we want to be somewhere around 10%, because if it's less than that, you're not going to have enough money to pay your taxes. And your business is not generating cash to be able to grow.
All right, very nice. That makes a lot of sense. I'm glad you clarified that. So on to the next question. At the end of the month, once you get your financial statements back from the accountant, you've got an income statement and you've got a balance sheet. And one thing that I know I do is I always go down to net income. That's the first thing I look at. But in terms of making these financial statements decision useful, what are some things that we can do when we get those financial statements? What are some things that we should be looking at?
Well, first of all, you want your financial statements organized in a way that is going to give you good information. So, for example, I see a lot of folks putting Amazon fees down in operating expenses. And I've seen accountants debate the point. The reality is, if you didn't have Amazon fees, you wouldn't be selling your product. And so I want to be able to look at what I know I've got to pay and understand what my gross margin is. So the first place I look in mine is gross margin. I want to know, is my gross margin at a level, and is it consistent over time, or is there something going on with trends here I need to pay attention to? I think when you talk about financial statements, different people generate them different ways. I would encourage you to get your financial statements printed out in a way that you're looking at month by month. So right now, at the end of September, you would have financial statements from January, February, March, all of that lined up across the page so that you can compare month by month what's going on. That allows you to look for, are there holes? did I forget to pay my rent? You probably heard about it already, but is there something where you typically are paying and that you didn't pay? Is there something that spiked high that you need to understand? Did you accidentally pay your rent twice? What's going on month by month? Do that kind of comparison. Then look at gross margin. What's going on with your gross margin? And you want to be sure that you're keeping that in line, because gross margin is going to tell you if something is amiss with your inventory. People wait till the end of the year to know what their profitability is, because they don't book any kind of cost of goods sold throughout the month to understand how their business is performing. And that's just fundamental. You've got to know if you got this much in revenue, say you got $10,000 in revenue, how much went out the door to make you that $10,000? That's the first question that every business owner needs to understand. Am I profitable there? And is that varying very much over time? Because if it is, it means you don't have your inventory system dialed in like you need it to be. And then after that, looking at what that net margin is, and are there things that you're paying for in the operating expenses that could be cut? And I like to do the same thing with the balance sheet. I like to look at that balance sheet month by month. Is my cash growing? Is my debt growing? Is my inventory growing or going down? Understanding the trends that are going on in your business is much more valuable than just having a data point, because our brain doesn't really keep all of that in our heads month by month. But seeing it in terms of a trend really starts to help you put into perspective the true nature of what's trending up and what's trending down, and what you might need to do to change those trends.
Okay, Cyndi, where do you see the biggest opportunities in the e-commerce space in terms of, profit first and just open space, considering the pandemic and everything that's going on?
Well, I think there's a lot of opportunity for people to really dial in their numbers and get their hands around how to manage their inventory and the impact that has on their cash flow. The biggest struggle that I see folks having is either resisting paying themselves and really fighting with trying to keep money going into the business and not taking money out for themselves, and trying to put it all into inventory. And what happens with that is, in times of stress, we start to feel like, why am I doing this? Why am I working so hard when I don't get any reward? And we've certainly been in, for 6 months now, quite a time of stress. It was really interesting in March when things started to really become uncertain. I got 2 different kinds of emails. And the first kind of email was, everything's fallen off the tracks. I need help. Can you help me put together some kind of cash plan? I'm not sure what we're going to do. And we went into kind of triage mode for some clients, doing 13-week cash flow planning to get them through. The other kind of email I got was, thank you so much. Because of Profit First, I've got a cash reserve and I'm going to be okay. And then pretty quick, because it really happened in a couple of weeks, things sorted themselves out for most of our clients. And then I was getting emails like, I'm so glad we had the money set aside to be able to fund our inventory, because we're growing 3 times. Our last month was 3 times what we thought it was going to be. And because we've got this inventory cash flow going on, we're able to sustain and grow and have cash reserves to grow our inventory. So I think, just people's acceptance of, you've got to have a business model that is going to throw off enough cash to generate the desired results that you want. And doing it through debt is not the answer, because the margins are just not strong enough there to support the kind of debt that most business owners have to employ right now, because, getting credit is not easy, and the things like the cabbage loans and the Amazon loans, those loans are expensive, and so just making sure that your business is sound and throwing off the cash, I think it's time well spent.
Okay, excellent. And to dig a little bit deeper there, so this year is with the pandemic, it's a lot different than, just say a normal year, like you mentioned earlier, looking at trends and you can really get a pulse of your business by looking at the books, month over month over month. And then, we have a global pandemic, right? And everything is kind of out the window. In terms of, we're looking at Q4, they're predicting anywhere between 30 and 50% increase in sales from this year versus last year. So how do you look at that and say, okay, I have an opportunity cost in front of me, and then I also have a risk. So how would you manage that in terms of, do I buy way more inventory than what I usually do and use the cash flow for that, or even debt, or do I not and take the risk of leaving that money on the table?
A lot of that depends on your tolerance. I think using debt, unless it is very affordable, a very affordable debt instrument, is setting you up for problems. People that had debt going into mid-March were those people who were stressed out about how they were going to handle the situation when Amazon quit accepting their products in, and they had to figure out how to, do merchant fulfilled, etc. You can pivot. It's an uncertain time. I know from seeing my clients' numbers that they're doing as much as 3 times what they did last year, Q4 already. That's how much it's already changed. And then forecasting, going into the next several months, it could be, 3 to 5 times what they're doing now. I just encourage people to look at what they can afford, do you have your numbers dialed in? Because yeah, you could spend a whole lot of money to sell a whole lot of stuff on Amazon, but if your gross margin's 2%, you're not helping your case. You're throwing gas on the fire. You're not getting down the road further. So it really depends on a number of things. But if you don't have confidence in your numbers, then to me that risk is way outside of what I would be comfortable with.
Sure. No, that totally makes sense. So moving along, what are some of the biggest failures and shortfalls that you've seen in your clients' e-commerce businesses, or just in general in the space?
The shortfalls are not recognizing when it's over. Debt is used to prop up the business a lot of times, and when you're on your 43rd credit card, and you're having to continue to open up credit cards and take out loans, you're beyond having a business that's going to be able to support itself, because it's going to crush under the weight of the debt. So I see people just not want to face that reality. And I understand that, because it's not a fun place to be. But you can close a business and walk away from it and open another business. But when you've gone to the point of jeopardizing your personal credit history and your personal credit, reputation, your score, then you're setting yourself up to have a lot of challenges going forward in your life. And I think people, they're optimistic, and I'm an optimistic person too, but there's a dose of reality that has to come in there to say, I am not going to put my family in jeopardy by continuing on a path of borrowing money that I have no clear way of paying back. And I'm not talking about hopes and dreams of paying back, but where you've really studied and understand that there's a way to pay it back. I think people are sometimes just not realistic with the situation that they're in.
Cyndi, I'm so glad that you responded that way, because this industry is full of at least on the surface, it appears that everyone has a success story. Everyone has a 7-figure business. Everyone is able to fire the man. And I think what you just described is all too common. And so I'm glad that you mentioned that. Now, one last question that I wanted to ask before we head into the lightning round, and this is a little bit embarrassing, but I'm going to share with you a story. So I read your book about a year ago, and as soon as I read it, I said, Ken, you got to read this. This is going to help both of us. This is going to help us with cash flow. Ken read it. Within that month, both of us had went to our respective banks and set up the checking accounts. We put $100 in each account, and we were going to implement Profit First. And then for the next 6 months, we continued doing the same thing that we were doing. We weren't moving money around, and there was some hesitation, and it's hard for me to describe this, but it was funny. I mentioned that to Ken, and he said, yeah, I've done the same thing. I haven't done anything with these bank accounts. And so, my first question is this common from some of the clients that you see? And 2, what are some ways that you can avoid this 6-month procrastination? Really is what it is.
Do you know why you procrastinated?
Yes, so I can speak for myself. My goal is to fire the man. I have I've went from about 200 to 300 SKUs in the last year, and I have been reinvesting every dollar I have back into inventory, which is a problem that you point out in the book. I have a sense of urgency to fire the man, and so my thought was, the more I can reinvest, the more I can grow, and I don't need these funds for my day-to-day expenses. That's my story. I can't speak for Ken.
So I think for me is kind of that principle of the bucket is full, and I just use the bucket for everything, and not having that mentality of, hey, paying myself first. So for the first 6 months after that, I didn't set anything up. I didn't do anything. And then over the last, I was really glad to hear you said that earlier, that it could take up to 18 months to implement this in a business, because I've got one of my companies, I'm about 80% there. And the other company, I'm about 20 to 30% there. It's taking longer, and not to get into the weeds, but it's really identified some areas that I need to improve on to actually make this work. So I think just really, backing myself into a corner and saying, hey, I have to do this to have a functional business really, is what made me spring into action. But yeah, I sat there for 6 months, and I don't know whether it was because I didn't understand the process, or if I don't know. Maybe it's common. I'm not sure.
Well, to be clear, the 18 months starts when you start. Not that 6 months is not counted in there. So you asked me, David, if it was common, and it is common. I can't tell you. I've had the chance to be at conferences with Mike, and people come up, oh, I loved your book. It was so wonderful. And he goes, oh, good. Did you implement it? Well, I haven't gotten around to it yet. And so I saw that happen a good bit. And so I do think it happens a lot. It takes a lot to change, it takes a lot to change anything. I mean, we don't just pick up and change our habits overnight. And when it comes to our money, we're afraid, we're afraid we're going to mess something up. We're afraid that we're going to put our dream of firing the man in jeopardy. And so that really comes down to not 100% buying into it. So, because if you 100% buy into it, you'll take the steps. And I know this because I see it over and over with clients. The reward is tremendous once you do. And the reward for getting where you want to go, it seems counterintuitive that by putting Profit First in place and diverting some of the money into things like profit and taxes and operating expenses, et cetera, that diverting that money away from buying more inventory, it seems counterintuitive that you're going to get there faster by doing profit first. But I will tell you, I have seen clients get there faster by doing profit first. And not only that, the reward is so great once they get there that it's beyond what they could conceive of. And I need to do more documentation of case studies of that, I think, because it is scary and it's hard to move forward. And the conventional wisdom is if you reinvest everything, then you're going to reap the reward faster. And what I've actually seen is reinvesting doesn't get you there any faster. And many times, because you've not built up things like starting to pay for yourself, starting to have tax money set aside, you're setting yourself up in a way where you're not financially sound to operate, and you're spending money on things that are not necessary. And all of that kind of thing diverts attention, and it diverts money, and it just doesn't, you're not operating at the most optimal way. I wish I had a way to help people see that more, that you could, it's kind of that fable of the tortoise and the hare. It's just like, I don't, how can that be? But we've heard that our whole lives. And I see it over and over with profit first. People think that this is going to make them go slow, and it probably does initially, but then when they go fast, they go really fast, and it really does pay off.
Okay, very, very nice. And so if obviously Ken and I have run into some roadblocks here, is this something that we could hire you at Bookskeep to help with this implementation? Is that something that you guys do?
Yeah, we have a couple of things going on. We, obviously do accounting, do the bookkeeping for e-commerce folks, but on the Profit First side, we have a Profit First consulting program where we have a 3-month coaching program where we go through and we look at your financials. We put them through the Profit First lens and do the analysis to get a profit assessment. That's kind of a big picture look at things. And with seasonality in the business, sometimes that's not the place where we want to start, because those percentages can be really high. And if you happen to be doing this in Q4, maybe your percentages are high. But if you're doing this in March and your season's in Q4, the cash may not be there. So we look at it from the overall perspective, kind of big picture, but then we get down to a typical month. And that's where we start to understand, all right, these are what you're paying money for. Maybe you need to be working on cutting some of those expenses because they're out of line from where a successful business would operate. And we use that analysis of a typical month to determine and set the allocation percentages. And we do it incrementally. We walk through where we think you can start, and we don't start everybody with all the bank accounts because it's too much. We do this beach entry like I've mentioned, and then we hold your hand for the next 2 months. So all of that analysis takes place in the first month, and then the next 2 months we hold your hand and get you through your first profit distribution, where you get to take money out of the business and reward yourself as the owner. And by then you've seen the whole process, and we leave you with a plan for what you need to continue to work on and how you can scale up your percentages in things like owner pay, profit, and start to scale down your operating expenses and just dial all that in. Sometimes it involves doing some analysis around your products and determining the profitability of products. Whatever is necessary, we kind of figure out where the attention needs to be placed to move you in the direction, so that by the end of that 3 months, we've started down the path and you know what to do for the next, just rinse and repeat going forward.
Sounds good. Well, you are going to be getting a call from me tomorrow about enrolling in that.
Awesome. We'd love to work with you.
Absolutely. So we like to wrap up each episode with a lightning round where we ask you 3 questions that we ask every guest at the end of the podcast. I'll kick it over to Ken.
Yeah. Are you ready, Cyndi?
I'm ready.
All right. What is your favorite book?
The Art of Possibility. The author is Benjamin Zander.
Okay. What are your hobbies?
My hobbies, I love gardening. That's where I spend my time.
Nice. What do you think sets apart successful e-commerce entrepreneurs from those who give up, fail, or never get started?
I think it's mindset, just having the resilience and the grit to figure it out. No matter what the day brings, you're going to figure it out.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, last thing, how can people get a hold of you if someone's struggling and they want to learn more about Profit First?
You can go to bookskeep.com and we talk on there about all our accounting services and Profit First. And there's a form there if you'd like to visit with me. Just fill out the form and let them know that you heard this Firing the Man podcast and you'd like to set up a time to talk, and I'd be welcome the chance to visit with people.
Very nice. And we will post all of that information in the show notes to this episode.
Thank you.
Cyndi, I want to thank you for being on a guest on the Firing the Man podcast.